All right, hope y'all can hear me. Let's see. Perfect. All right, hope y'all can hear me. Hope y'all are doing good. I'm back. Yeah, I think so. I think it's okay. I think I'm back. I think I'm here. All right, guys. It's time for our study group. Yes, it's time for our study group. Yay. Okay, cool. So we are reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. So for those of you who are new to the study group, every week I get together and with y'all and I read a book and then I make commentary on that. So for those of you tuning in, if you are tuning in because you want a free, if you're tuning in because you want a reading or a personal reading, unfortunately that was in the last hour. Now we're in the study group time, so no personal readings this hour. So this is all going to be study group material, study group information, study group time. So I'm going to read from the book and I'm going to stop, make commentary. If you guys have questions pertaining to the book material or to the topic, which is spirituality, spiritual topics, but mostly trying to focus on the material in the book, you can post your question in the comment section below. But it has to be pertaining to this. If it has nothing to do with the study group or the material or what we're talking about spiritually, I'm not going to answer any personal questions. So this is all study group time, okay? All right, guys. Hope y'all are doing well. Let me see what y'all are saying before we get started here. Let's see. That's a personal question. So funny, I fell asleep and woke up and said, "No, I'm late for group. This worked out nice." Well, I'm glad you took a nap. I hope I hope that you haven't been going crazy with work. So I know that it's going crazy right now in several places. So hoping that you can recoup yourself or recoup energy and not go crazy right now. So all right, guys. All right, so let me get started. So I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. And let's see, the last time I was at page 59 of the book. So that's where we're going to start off at, is 59, the core of ego. Again, I'm going to read for a little bit, and then if I have something that I want to add to or I want to kind of go into, then I will go ahead and Jay Benez is like, "I'm nervous for my session with you come October." No, don't be nervous. If anything, I always tell people, if anyone should be nervous, it should be me. I'm the one that has to get in front of an audience or get in front of people and prove myself every single time. Most of the time I'm successful. There are some times where people just don't think so, but that's okay. But I'm the one that should be nervous. Don't you be nervous. You're not the one that should be nervous at all. But I know most people are. Everybody tells me, I'm nervous before in a session. I'm like, that's okay. It's just me. All right, so let's get started. So page 59. Most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. As long as you are completely unaware of this, you take the thinker to be who you are. This is the egoic mind. We call it egoic because there is a sense of self, of I, ego, in every thought, every memory, every interpretation, opinion, viewpoint, reaction, emotion. This is unconsciousness. Spiritually speaking, your thinking, the content of your mind, is of course conditioned by the past, your upbringing, culture, family, background, and so on. The central core of all your mind activity consists of certain repetitive and persistent thoughts, emotions, and reactive patterns that you identify with most strongly. This entity is the ego itself. In most cases, when you say I, it is the ego speaking, not you, as we have seen. It consists of thought and emotion, of a bundle of memories you identify with as me and my story, of habitual roles you play without knowing of it, of collective identifications such as nationality, religion, race, social class, or political allegiance. It also contains personal identifications, not only with possessions, but also with opinions, external appearance, long-standing resentments, or concepts of yourself as better than or not as good as others, as a success or failure. The content of the ego varies from person to person, but in every ego the same structure operates. In other words, egos only differ on the surface. Deep down, they are all the same. In what way are they the same? They live on identification and separation. When you live through the mind-made self comprised of thought and emotion that is the ego, the basis for your identity is precarious because thought and emotion are by their very nature ephemeral, fleeting. So every ego is continuously struggling for survival, trying to protect and enlarge itself, to uphold the I thought. It needs the opposite thought of the other, the conceptual. I cannot survive without the conceptual other. The others are most other when I see them as my enemies. At one end of the scale of this unconscious egoic pattern lies the egoic compulsive habit of fault finding and complaining about others. Jesus referred to it when he said, "Why do you seek the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" At the other end of the scale, there is a physical violence between individuals and warfare between nations. In the Bible, Jesus' question remains unanswered. But the answer is, of course, because when I criticize or condemn another, it makes me feel bigger or superior. So I'll stop there because I want to comment on that. So what they're referring to or what they're talking about is the ego and our ego's job, our ego's role in our lives. In other words, people like to demonize the ego. They think of the ego as this evil thing, which in some instances it represents the version of us that is separate. It gives us the illusion of separation from God. It gives us the perception that we are not one and that we are all separate as well. And it also gives us the perception that we identify with things and with the things in this reality, not with the truth or the authentic beingness, which is who we are besides all of the things in this world. So the ego's job is to, and here's the thing, they make it seem as if the ego is trying everything within its power to separate you or to hurt you or to cause you to suffer. I don't agree with that, because the ego's job is simply to create the idea of separation and the idea of being who we are individually, separate from the mass creation or God or source or all that is. So the ego's doing what it's supposed to do. The problem is the ego goes in check sometimes, and our ego can run around like a loose dog, and it starts to basically, it's almost like a dog. It's almost like, what is it? The squirrel, like that's the ego. The ego's constantly like being influenced and engaging with the world around us, with the reality of this world. And it is constantly engaging and then responding or reacting. And so it engages by acknowledging things from a physical perspective, meaning whatever we feel on a physical level is tied to the ego's experience. And then whatever we're going through mentally, emotionally, is also tied to the ego's experience. So when the ego is connecting and identifying and interacting with this world, first we feel it in our physical being, which is the sense of joy or of enjoyment, or of like pain and suffering. So there's an immediate reaction or response on some physical level. Sometimes it's pain and joy and getting all those great things from it. Sometimes it's a physical suffering or response to it. So that's the first level, first stage of it. The second stage is the mental ego, because there's the ego of the body, ego of the mind. The ego of the mind is a tricky bitch, because she's always trying to figure out who she is in comparison or in contrast with the reality of this world. And so all that we experience, all that we engage with, all that we interact with, the ego is immediately going into its role of identifying how connected we are to this thing, or how apart or separate we are from this thing. Now, it already by default separates us from all of ourselves, so all of us feel this disconnect from each other, because that's the ego. The ego's job is to do so. But once you get past that first layer of separation, then there's a second layer of like, how do I connect with this? How much am I connected to this thing or this situation or this person? And there's much more deeper, complex interactions between the egoic being, the egoic self, and certain scenarios. And that's where the opportunities are. And that's where people get a little bit confused, because those moments where the ego is having to interact with certain situations or with types of energies, those are opportunities for us to understand ourselves, to know ourselves, and to realize what we are in all of it. So if, for example, I'm Ferny, I am who I am in this physical body. I'm this being, this form in this reality. But that's the ego. That's my egoic self having given me that sense of awareness of being in this form. So when I engage with people, I'm not engaging from the perspective of the highest version of myself, that's soul, with the human version of a person. I'm engaging as a human being to a human being, as a human being with circumstances, with scenarios, with certain conditions. And so in that, I as a person, I as this persona, Ferny, has to figure myself out. I have to understand who I am in all of this, how I'm going to respond to certain things, who I'm going to be in this moment. Here's an example of this. So, and I'll use this because this is a hot topic, right? So right now, we've got the variant going crazy. People are like rushing to get vaccines. Some people are like fighting against it with no, and they're like, I'm not getting a vaccine or whatever. Okay, that's your choice. But like my sister, she called me earlier because they basically let them know. She works for a hospital in the IT, but she's like basically said, hey, they're telling us that we have to get the vaccine or we're no longer going to be employed with the company in a month or 30 days. So I have a decision to make and I have to give them my decision by that time. And so right away, just because I have my own opinions, I have my own ideas, I have my own perspective and all that, I could have easily just said, well, girl, having a job and a future and the risk of there might be risks to your having a reaction to the vaccine, but I know people who have also gotten COVID and their life has been completely destroyed. So you have to decide, do you want to just risk a potential reaction to the vaccine but keep your job and know that you're fine? Or would you rather take the risk with COVID, not knowing the full situation, because you have your perspective, your opinions about that? And she and I have very different opinions. We're very much on two different spectrums of ideology. She has a very different mindset than I do. Or you can just take that risk, go with that, and then see if that's worth the effort. But there are enough people, and if you put it into perspective, it's not a perfect choice. You have to choose what do you want to deal with? Do you want to deal with a potential reaction from the vaccine and no job? Or do you want to take the risk of potentially getting COVID and that being much more significant than what the vaccine could potentially do to you, and then also not have a job? It's like which one do you choose? Which one are you preferring? But she don't see it that way. And for her, it was a very different perspective. So in that moment, I could come at it from my perspective, from my angle, from how I feel about the whole situation. But I decided to practice compassion and just empathy. And what I told her was, it's not an easy decision to make. It's not an easy choice. You have to decide what you want to do and what you're willing to live with in this case. But here's what you can try. And so I gave her a potential way of trying to get around that or bypassing that option to maybe create a different option for herself. But I was empathizing with her and I was trying to help her to feel like I love her and I'm with you in whatever you go through, and I don't want you to feel like you're alone, or but at the same time, this different type of situation with all of the things that are going on there. So it's an interesting dynamic to practice because you have your position, you hold yourself, and you base who you are on your positions in life, and you attach yourself to those positions. But then you also have a human being, and in the moment she was crying because she was really upset because she just felt like she didn't have a choice or a decision in this. And I'm like, I get it, I understand not having a choice. You have to deal with, you have two options, neither one are perfect, but you have to make a choice. And so I was just empathizing with her, and I was just trying to help her to feel comforted and to help her to feel like, I love you, whatever you decide for yourself, I love you no matter what, and here's what you can try. And I decided to empathize with her because I love her. I don't want her to suffer. I don't want her to go through what she's going through. I mean, if we had it my way, none of us would be having to make these decisions or these choices. But this is an imperfect world, and we're dealing with imperfect times, and we're dealing with situations that are not ideal. So we have to make choices. But I chose to interact with her and engage with her from a place of compassion and empathy versus trying to drum into her head my position or my perspective on it, because it wasn't about me. It's about what she's going through, what she's struggling with, and the situation she's having to face. And so sometimes in life we get very connected and very attached to our position, to our side, to our, and in my in my mind, I'm like, we're at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all hurt when we're we all hurt from pain. We all suffer. We all struggle. We're all human beings. We all want this. We all want to experience the same things. We all want to be accepted. We want to be loved. We want to have support. We want to have, So we're all human beings at the end of the day. Strip it all away. We're all human beings. And that's not an easy thing to embrace when you have very strong opinions and very strong values and ideas about stuff. And this is what I was talking about before, where, a lot of us have struggled with the last year because the world has changed and society has changed and it operates very differently now. Now people open their mouths about everything and they will bash or they'll put someone down or they'll make them try to feel stupid and stuff. And I'm guilty of the same thing because I've gotten to those moments where I'm angry and upset and I'm just going at it. But past that, these circumstances that we're facing right now, they are not going to be here forever. It feels like they're going to be here forever. They're not going to be here forever. This too shall pass. These situations, these scenarios are going to pass. And at some point, we still have to face the reality of how we've been with each other and the fact that we're all human beings and the fact that, we still need to, in some way or another, we're all going to have to still be there for each other, whether we like it or not. That is just a part of the reality of this world. And so you can stay wholeheartedly, completely attached to your role, your position, and your mindset, or in these moments where you can practice just empathizing and being a human being, focus on the human being and not so much on the position. And it gets tricky because there's a place and time for it. It doesn't mean you should do that with everybody in the same way, but there's a place and time for it. And there's a place and time to practice empathy, to practice compassion. And I definitely want my sister to evolve and to grow and to just realize some things, but she has to deal with the life that she chooses. She has to deal with the life that she is living. And at the end of the day, I still love my sister no matter what. And I want her to know that she's not alone and I love her and I'm there. So if she wants to talk, she wants to cry, whatever it is, I'm there. So it's hard. It's a hard decision to make at that point. And you have to decide for yourself. Now, granted, in her situation, I think for her, she's more afraid of the reactions to the vaccine. And I get it because I know that, vaccines are not perfect and that people definitely have responses and reactions. I've experienced a couple of reactions. My partner's experienced a couple of reactions. Still nowhere near the reality of dealing with COVID because I saw my assistant go through that and I would not wish that on anyone. But it is what it is. So for her, in her life, with her fiance or her significant other, they both have very similar mindsets or similar positions. What I was telling my partner was, I was like, if you and I were, we had very set positions or very set opinions about things, and you had more to risk because of your health, and there are certain things that you could potentially be affected by. Me being the partner, not having any health issues, not having any stuff, I would just say, you know what? You can afford to lose your job. I will keep the job, but I will get the vaccine even though I'm flat out against it, and I'll get it anyways so that you don't have to take the risk. And then let's see where that goes. That's stepping outside of a position and of a mindset and then being there for your fellow human being. I doubt that's going to happen just because that's not the mindset of this person, but that's just an idea of how you can react as a human being versus react as a position, react as a person based in this mindset and position. And so that's where it gets tricky. And so we have plenty of opportunities to be human beings, to respond with compassion, to respond with consideration, to respond with empathy. And even though we don't always agree, there's plenty of opportunity for us to practice that and to be that for each other, regardless of our backgrounds and what we feel attached to. Complaining and resentment. Complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Every complaint is a little story the mind makes up that you completely believe in. Whether you complain aloud or only in thought makes no difference. Some egos that perhaps don't have much else to identify with easily survive on complaining alone. When you are in the grip of such an ego, complaining, especially about other people, is habitual and, of course, unconscious, which means you don't know what you are doing. Applying negative mental labels to people, either to their face or more commonly when you speak about them to others or even just think about them, is often part of this pattern. Name calling is the crudest form of such labeling and of the ego's need to be right and triumph over others. Jerk, bastard, bitch, all definitive pronouncements that you can't argue with. On the next level, down on the scale of unconsciousness, you have shouting and screaming, and not much below that, physical violence. Resentment is the emotion that goes with complaining and the mental labeling of people and adds even more energy to the ego. Resentment means to feel better, indignant, aggrieved, or offended. You resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, their lack of integrity, what they are doing, what they did in the past, what they said, what they failed to do, what they should or shouldn't have done. The ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it into their identity. Who is doing that? The unconsciousness in you, the ego. Sometimes the fault that you perceive in another isn't even there. It is a total misinterpretation. It is a total misinterpretation, a projection by a mind conditioned to see enemies and to make itself right or superior. At other times, the fault may be there, but by focusing on it, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, you amplify it. And what you react to in another, you strengthen in yourself. Non-reaction to the ego in others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression of the collective human dysfunction. When you realize it's not personal, there is no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. But by not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. At times, you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. This you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness that is the ego. Non-reaction is not weakness, but strength. Another word for non-reaction is forgiveness. To forgive is to overlook, or rather to look through. You look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being as his or her essence. The ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people, but also about situations. What you can do to a person, you can also do to a situation. Make it into an enemy. The implication is always, this should not be happening. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. I'm being treated unfairly. And the ego's greatest enemy of all is, of course, the present moment, which is to say, life itself. I'll start with that because I want to make a reference to that, or I want to acknowledge something about that. So I have one client where I had a client a while back that she was going through some legal issues, and the legal issues all seem to have the same pattern or the same type of scenario or situation playing out. And I had mentioned that, hey, it feels like there's a theme that seems to keep repeating or keep showing up in your life. And this is not by coincidence. This is not because God, did a roulette wheel and said, oh, I'm going to give you this issue on a regular basis for the rest of your life. No, that's not what's going on there. Something this person is doing is triggering these experiences or events to take place more often than they should, honestly. And so I mentioned this to them, and they're like, really? And they're like, yeah. And they said, what do you think is leading to this, or what do you think is causing this to happen? And my perspective is, I think that in your life, usually when I've seen this situation before, I'm always reminded of clients who grew up in an environment where they were mistreated or they were bullied by males or the father figure, and because they're bullied or bullied or mistreated by the father figure, the male, the authority figure in their life, as they get older, they're trying to prove something to themselves. Whenever they go through an empowerment period, they try to prove something to themselves, so they're ready to do battle. They're ready to put the gloves on and go after any asshole or any organization that carries that same type of energy. And so what I mentioned is this is the theme that's playing out. So you keep bringing this up because you're not at peace with this relationship with your father, or you're not at peace with the past. You're not okay with what's taking place. And no one's asking you to accept or to embrace or to love your past, but you have to come to peace with it. Nothing you do now is going to change what happened back then. It is what it is. So you can accept it and just come to peace with it so you can move forward and release this energy, or you can keep tackling this energy in your state of being, and it's going to keep showing up in experiences and in scenarios, which for her it was showing up as a job situation and her having to deal with these legal issues with these bullies that were representative of that male energy in her life. And so that energy is carried over. So when someone is going through life and they keep encountering the same types of misfortunes or the same types of situations where they feel like they're being mistreated or treated unfairly, etc., then something has happened in that person's life that has triggered the mindset and the attachment to that feeling, to that experience. And so even if you move on with your life and you get away from the situation that has triggered that for you, that energy is sitting with you. That's continuing to sustain itself within you, and you're going to carry it forward. And it's like a magnet. It goes forward with you, and it attracts to it similar experiences and similar situations that may bring up that theme. And the reason why it does this is because our internal being, our truest being, our highest version of ourselves knows that this is not who we are, and that the way we were treated is not what is truly authentically what we're deserving of, and that we're not that thing, we're not that situation. But the ego is continuously reminding us of the past, continuously bringing up these moments where we feel this way, we feel super connected to, we're attached. Until we bring peace within ourselves about that situation, it's going to continue to perpetuate and bring about more experiences, because the part of us that knows better, the part of us that knows what it really is wanting to heal. And in order to heal, you have to face what has caused the trauma within you. An example of this is years ago when I worked at Starbucks. There's two things. One is I was, bullied as a kid. I was always bullied for my sexuality, being a gay man. I was always bullied for this. And I never learned how to stand up for myself or learned how to be, confident in who I was and own who I was. And over time, as I got older, I faced situations in life that gave me an opportunity to grow, to evolve, to step into this empowered state within myself. But it was a process and it took time. But at some point, it was back at Starbucks. I was the manager. I was opening the store, and there was a gentleman outside the store who was just sitting there because he was a regular homeless man. He used to always come, hang out at the front store, and then every customer that would try to come into the store, he would immediately start going at them and trying to get them to give him money. And sometimes they would feel uncomfortable and they would do it. So I was putting out the furniture. We hadn't opened yet. And I told him, and I said, sir, I'm sorry, but you can't sit here. You're not going to be able to hang out. This is private property. And he immediately started to call me names. He's like, what did you say, faggot? He's going off on me and calling me all these things. And immediately I felt triggered, and I was like, oh no. I was like, I put up with this long enough in my life. I am done. This is the moment where I no longer accept this kind of treatment or any behavior from another human being doing this to me or being this way to me. So immediately I looked at him, went up to him, and I said, sir, I said that you're not going to be able. And as soon as I started to speak, he got up to my face and he spit right into my face and into my mouth. And he spit at me. And then he was like, what are you going to do, faggot? What are you going to do, faggot? And so he was coming at me with that. And so immediately, I responded. I didn't even think about what I was going to do in that moment. I just reacted because it was a self-defense thing for me. So as soon as that happened and he said that and he spit, immediately I responded and I came out and I punched him in the face. And I punched him in the face. I've only been physically aggressive with a human being twice in my lifetime, if I remember correctly. And both times were with bullies. And so I immediately responded and I punched him in the face. And when I punched him, all I saw was just blood shoot out of his nose. And he stepped back and he's looking at me and he's got like blood coming out of his nose. And I'm like, oh shit, I broke his nose, right? So I felt bad that I did that to him, but at the same time, I was pissed and angry because I was like, I will not be treated this way. So I was very much identified with this persona, with this state of being a gay man, being treated this way, constantly being bullied. So that all came out in that moment. And so as soon as I punched him and he stepped back and he looked like he was shocked, he could not believe that I hit him. And I said, get the fuck out of here, motherfucker, and I don't ever want to see you here again. And so he was just like, and so then he stepped back and he was basically leaving. And then I made the mistake of turning around and walking to the front door. And the moment that I turned around and turned my back to him, instead of walking backwards, I turned around and turned my back to him. He jumped me and then he started to beat the hell out of me. And when I say I beat the hell out of me, he like beat the hell out of me. I have it on video because the security cameras caught it at the store. But you can see in the video, I'm in front of the store and he's like on me. He's punching me in the face, punching me in my neck, punching me in my body. He's kicking my head. I mean, he was like digging into me. And then he stopped and then he took off. And so that was it. And I got up and I was like just in shock myself because I just literally went through that. And then I went inside the store and I locked it. And then of course, you know, that led to a whole host of other things. But suffice it to say, after that, I was a little bit traumatized with homeless people hanging around the store because I was like, every time a homeless person, it's more males, not so much females, but more males, every time a homeless person would hang around the store, I would immediately have that get triggered in me, and then I didn't want to deal with them, I didn't want to be around them, and I had all of this fear and anxiety and trauma that was getting triggered every single time. And homeless people are just people. They're just people who live on the street. They don't have a place to live. They're just trying to get by as well. Now, definitely a lot of people are mentally ill. They're suffering from conditions. Some people choose that because they don't want to be a part of society. But for the most part, most people who live in that state and in that kind of environment, they are not choosing that. And so I didn't want to become this person who was always going to be angry or create hatred inside of myself for this kind of homeless person. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to become that person. I didn't want to be filled with hatred or with anger or with fear. And so what I decided to do is I decided that I was going to work through some of the trauma. And I wasn't going to just wait for this to show up again in my life. I was going to intentionally work through some of it. And I had a customer at the time who he was part of a church. He worked at a church. And I mentioned to him and I said, hey, you know, because he had heard about what happened to me. Everybody heard what happened to me. But he had heard what happened to me. And he had said, I had mentioned to him, I said, hey, you know, I'm trying to find a way to work through some of this, and I need to come to peace within myself about this. I also don't want to become this hateful person or this angry person or this fearful person. So I want a program that feeds the homeless folk. I want to go out there and feed some homeless people and connect with people and talk to them and get to know them as a human being, not as this experience or trauma in my head, because I need to humanize the thing in my head that is filled with fear or hatred or anger. So I need to humanize that, and I need to do something good in the process. So I told him, I said, do you know of anything with your church or anything? He's like, you know, it's a funny thing you say that. We actually do. We get together every day and we put together these lunch kits or lunch packs, and we give them out to homeless people, and they can come every single day to get a bag. And I was like, okay, perfect. I was like, I want to be a part of that. And so I went ahead, signed up, and I showed up, and I showed up once a week. I was trying to do it once a week. And so it's funny because the other people who would show up, they were all like young teenagers, and the moms were afraid of the homeless people and what they were going to do to them. And so they would just like they only wanted their daughters or the little girls, because it's mostly females, mostly girls. They only wanted them to hand the bag through the door. They didn't actually want them to go outside and connect with these people. And I was like, okay, well, that's just a shitty thing altogether. And I saw that, and I was like, that's racist. You know, that's racist, because I mean, most of the homeless population in Houston, and where I'm from, or Houston, is mostly black folk. And so I automatically, the people who were showing up at the church were white. And so I was like, wait, that's just racist. Y'all are like totally, these are human beings. You need to treat them like human beings. And so I would just like, screw it. And so I was trying to get the girls to go out there, and I was like, look. And I got a picture because we took pictures up there. But I would get a bag, I would go out, and I would hand it out, and I would sit down and talk to these people. And they were just people. They were just human beings like you and I. They just were going through some stuff. And that's the situation that they were handed. But I did that every single week for several weeks, actually for a few months, because I was trying to come to peace within myself about the trauma that I endured. And I blame myself for part of that, because I'm the one that is, well, even though he's the one that started calling me names and spit in my face, I feel like I took the first physical action. And so I still blame myself for starting that whole spiral. So I still own up to that part being my thing, but I didn't want to turn this into like a, all homeless people are evil or bad or wrong or aggressive or whatever. So I did that for several weeks, and I helped myself work through the trauma. I also helped myself to connect with some people that I think I needed to connect to, but I also got a chance to just talk to people and maybe lighten up their day a little bit, because when you're a homeless person, your day can be pretty heavy, and this way there's just like someone cares enough to have a conversation with me. So I did that for various reasons. You can say, oh, you did it just for yourself, Ferny. Well, yeah, I mean, I did it for myself, but I also was doing a good thing in the process. So that's what I did. But that helped me to work through the trauma. And so sometimes when we are so attached to a traumatic event in our history or in our lifetime, it can set the stage for future attractions of similar energy. And if we don't resolve it or come to peace within it, if we don't come to peace with it within ourselves, it will show up at some point down the road. This is why they say don't run away from the things in your life, because they'll follow you and you're gonna have to deal with it at some point. And it's true. You will have to deal with the things that have caused you the most pain. You may not have to deal with it in the same way or with the same people, but it's gonna come up again, and you have to face it at some point, because this is a challenge the soul has presented itself. This is an opportunity for expression of compassion, for connecting with the internal being that we are all, which is God. We're all God loving force. And so there's a opportunity there to connect with that internal being. And that is one way that I used an opportunity to practice that, to experience that, to share compassion. To talk to me like, I ain't talking to you, girl. But that's just one way that you can, practice compassion and so forth. Going back to this, the ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people, but also about situations. What you can do to a person, you can also do to a situation. Make it into an enemy. The implication is always, this should not be happening. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. I'm being treated unfairly. And the ego's greatest enemy of all is, of course, the present moment, which is to say life itself. Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or deficiency so that it can be put right. And to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with bad quality or behavior. There is no ego in telling the waiter that your soup is cold and needs to be heated up. If you stick to the facts, which are always neutral, how dare you serve me cold soup? That's complaining. There is a me here that loves to feel personally offended by weirdest internet connections lately. So let's go back to this. See if you can catch that is to say, notice the voice in the head, perhaps in the very moment it complains about something, and recognize it for what it is, the voice of ego. No more than a conditioned mind pattern, a thought. Whenever you notice that voice, you will also realize that you are not the voice, but the one who is aware of it. In fact, you are the awareness that is aware of the voice. In the background, there is the awareness. In the foreground, there is the voice, the thinker. In this way, you are becoming free of the ego, free of the unobserved mind. The moment you become aware of the ego in you, it is strictly speaking no longer the ego, but just an old conditioned mind pattern. Ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. The old mind pattern or mental habit may still survive and reoccur for a while because it has the momentum of thousands of years of collective human consciousness behind it. But every time it is recognized, it is weakened. And I'll stop there. So here's another way to interpret that. So, sometimes we overly associate or we overly feel attached to certain positions and to certain perspectives. Just yesterday, for example, in my life, because I just was talking about this UFO video or this UFO documentary that just came out, which is really good, by the way. I should watch it. It's with J.J. Abrams. He just came out with his own series UFO documentary. And in the UFO industry, if you do any for those of you who have never read into or looked into ufology, there are as many stories as there are people who are part of that, and there are so many narratives and so many storylines, and it's hard to distinguish between what has more evidence or what has more validation and what's just garbage. But this documentary was interesting because it says pretty much most of what we know or most of what we watch, see, hear, or think is garbage, and only a little fraction of it is genuine or true. And I like that because I agree with that. That's what I've encountered myself. When you look into it or read this or read that, it's just narrative after narrative after narrative, and it's just how many stories, how many narratives are there, because it's way too many, and there's a lot of junk in all of that. But I really appreciated the documentary. I think it poses a lot of interesting ideas, and there's a lot of, unless you have some awareness of some of the historical context of UFOs, Roswell, all this other stuff, you will miss some of the obvious pieces of information that are expressed in that documentary. If you have a background or have spent some time looking into some of that, it definitely feels you definitely see the patterns. And that's what I do, right? That's what I do for a living. My job is to pay attention, be aware, be sensitive, and pay attention and recognize patterns, recognize themes, recognize stuff, which is what I do for a living. And so when I was watching the documentary, there was a lot of very loud and obvious things that were happening there with what they were presenting, even though they weren't saying anything, but they kept sharing images of certain films and certain things. And I told my partner, I'm like, did you notice how often they showed that news network or how often they showed that film but didn't really show the others? Did you notice? And he was like, yeah, I did. And I was like, yeah, because they're telling you something. They're just not making it very clear, and they are not ready to put it all out there, but they're definitely telling us something, and it's very obvious if you pay attention to what they're doing. So I had just posted, I reposted it, said, hey everybody, this is a really good, or I love this, finally answers. Not so much answers what they're telling me, but answers if you pay attention and you watch shit, you will realize some things, or you will figure some things out on your own without having to really be told. And so I had posted something and re-shared it, and someone went in and commented after my comment, and it was it'd be real easy to sell you some beachfront property in Oklahoma, because so let that be something to think about. And so they were basically just saying that I don't know what I'm talking about and I was wrong, and I was just so immediately I was just who are you, asshole? Who are you, asshole? Which it turns out it's some guy who was he's a washed up, he called himself that. I didn't call himself that. He says, I'm a washed up musician from season 5 of American Idol or something. But that was his own thing. And I was just who are you to tell me what I should believe or what I should think? I've done pretty well in my life. I've done pretty good. I've been able to achieve and to enjoy and to survive a lot of the craziness that a lot of people haven't been able to go without being unscathed. And so I've done pretty well for myself, and I followed my instincts and I followed my intuition, and it's definitely steered me in a direction that has helped me survive and do well for myself throughout all of the craziness of this world. Who are you to tell me that what I believe or what I trust or that what I feel is not correct? It's maybe you need to take a look at yourself. You're the washed up musician. You're the one that's not doing too well. So obviously you don't know how to trust your instincts or know how to line up. So immediately I got reactionary, and I got reactive, and I was I was getting irritated. I was ready to bust into this person with some basic common knowledge or basic logic. And so I was asking my friend about it, and I was like, do you think I was being a bit of a, I know I'm being a little arrogant and an asshole with this comment. And so we were talking about that, and she's like, I don't think you needed to share that. I think that, what's the point? This is someone who it doesn't even care, and nothing for them is going to change. And I'm like, you're exactly right. And not only that, but right afterwards, when I wrote the comment, I was like, what's the point? Like, what's the point? What's the point of being so invested? What's the point of caring about this person's opinion? What's the point of really even considering this person's position? Because they're not really giving me anything of substance, and they're not asking me for help. Why should I be even invested in this at all? Because like within 30 minutes after me making that comment, I was all riled up, and I was all rowdy, and I was all anxious. And so I was like, what's the point? Like, what's the freaking point of me being invested in this? There's no point. And so I was feeling that way. And then when I asked her, and because sometimes I need to get out of my own head, and I need somebody to tell me from like an objective perspective. And so I only ask people who I either hold in high esteem or who I have confidence in. I asked them sometimes for an opinion or an idea. So I asked her, and she came back and she gave me the same response that my own inner self said. What's the point? Why are you that invested in it? And so I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I pulled back and I said, there's no point. There's no point. I don't need to be, there's literally nothing to be gained from this. Someone's going to back it away or back it off. So, and that's it. And I dropped it. But that's just an example that sometimes we get overly invested and we get overly attached to a position or an opinion. And if someone out there in the world is commenting or is blasting or is doing this or that, we take it so personally because we think that we are that thing that they are judging or they're critiquing. And what I mentioned to my friend is like, growing up, I never said anything. I was a palatable personality. I was a people pleaser. I never said a damn thing to anybody about anything. I never stood up for myself. I didn't know what it meant to, be very direct with people, or to like really, if I needed to dig into somebody, to dig into them. Like, I didn't have those skills. I didn't have the ability. So growing up, I just was always held back, and I held myself back. And now, today, as I've gotten older, it's the opposite. I think 2020 did a little bit of this to me, where it gave me a bit of incentive to be vocal, to be expressive, to share my position, to share my thoughts, to share my ideas about stuff. The problem is that's the other extreme. And so for me, the extreme is like, do I say nothing and just be a wimp about it? Or do I go off and like put someone in their place? And it's like neither. I need to be in the middle. I need to find a sweet spot. And so for me, it's an experience, and it's a balance that I am working to achieve and been working on for some time now. But it's a process of developing this balance. And I think a lot of us would benefit from having the same opportunity to practice that balance. Because when we jump into those extremes, we really don't achieve as much or gain from the experience as much as we can if we just have a balance and we're more centered. And so for me, it's more like, I don't need to be in this extreme of being, not saying anything. I don't need to be in this extreme where I'm overly like ready to crush somebody. I need to be in the middle somewhere, because in the middle somewhere is where I can do the most good, and where I can keep my perspective, and I can hold to the balance of knowing that I am God in form, but I am also human just like you. And we are, by the way, we're all God in form, but we're also, human like each other. And so it helps me to keep that balance in the middle. Having the extremes isn't going to help anything. It isn't going to help you. It isn't going to help me. And it, quite frankly, is just going to take up energy and time that can best be used in a completely different way. So, last night I listened to your UFO podcast about your dream about the white owl, and a couple of weeks ago I listened to Dolores Cannon's voice about UFOs, and all I can say is I'm amazed and I believe. Oh yeah, as far as like UFOs and like visitors from other planets, I 100% believe that. That's not even a question for me, but it's just like, what's the story? What's the story about it? Like we all want to know the story. So let's see where it goes. So I can see what you guys are commenting on, like in reference to. Yeah. Candace said, I chose the vaccine and my partner did after you explained how our reality is, and my mom is sick with COVID and his grandpa. I'm already hearing it from the family as well, that people are starting to get sick. And so it's, again, this comes down to, we don't live in a perfect world. In an ideal world, we have to make decisions and choices that are not perfect. So make the decision that will keep you alive or allow you to continue. Don't choose the decision that could cost you your life. And if it doesn't cost you your life, then it at least might affect you like fundamentally for the rest of your life. That's not to say that the vaccine won't, because there's definitely side effects, but it's based on the numbers and what we're seeing and what we're hearing. There's definitely more breakthroughs than they're reporting or that they're sharing, but those people are not dying. They're not suffering in the most sense with these catastrophic body failures because of the situation. So yeah, just Cassidy says, and yes, we officially have COVID back in our facility. Yeah, it's and we all want COVID to go away oh my God, so do we ever? But here's the thing though, COVID, you can see it as first of all, I think that when people talk about, in every generation there's the Christ and the Antichrist, meaning that there's a representation of this high sense of love and compassion and integrity, and then there's also the opposite, and that's in every generation. That's not like, oh my God, we're all waiting for the rapture, we're all waiting for the end. No, like it shows up in cycles every few generations. And so in this generation, what I was saying, what I had posted on Twitter was, has anyone figured out that the mark of the beast is a perspective and a mindset based in fear or based in control or dominance? Has anyone figured that out yet? That it's the mark of the beast is a perspective, a mindset. Because once you are tainted by this mindset, to change it means to go against who you believe yourself to be. Because if you disconnect yourself or detach yourself from that mindset, from those positions, from those ideas, you are basically giving up who you knew yourself to be. But you are not those things to begin with. You were never those things to begin with. I'm not attached to this vaccine as if that's who I am. I'm not this vaccine. The vaccine is an opportunity to just survive and be okay without serious condition. And what I tell my partner is, look, my mother's schizophrenic. Mental illness runs in my family. And in my family, whenever people get to their older ages, the one thing that they all tend to suffer from is mental illness. So I told my partner, for me, my fear is mental illness, because I don't know if that can get triggered by whatever. I can say I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to do whatever I can, but that doesn't matter, because genetics are genetics, and there's only so much you can do with that. So I told my partner, I can't afford to go crazy. Our entire life will collapse. Everything will go to hell in a handbasket if I lose my mind. And seeing my assistant, my former assistant, because she's not my assistant anymore, but my former assistant, seeing her go through what she went through and how crazy she got in that with all of the psychosis, I was like, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to take that risk and do that to myself. So I will not. I'm gonna go the opposite way. So that's what I decided to do. But yeah. I've been doing rampages multiple times a day, life-changing for letting go of ego. So many blessings have happened. Good. I think that's a good thing to practice. And what I say is, what I was saying is, this whole experience with COVID and what it's done to us as a society. Thank you. I hear you, ringing in my ears. What it's done to us in society is, this is an opportunity for us as human beings on this planet. Because we're either going to be able to come together and work together to beat this, or we're just going to continue to struggle with each other until we finally get to a point where we have no choice but to come together to beat this. And so I think at this point, it's an opportunity for us to evolve. And this is, people always said, the ascension. And people thought, people were going to levitate in the air. They were going to become energetic beings and float up to the sky. I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell you were thinking. This is reality. This is it. This is what you have to work through and power through. It's a real situation on a human level that you have to process and work through. Yeah. It's both with my sister, and I really feel bad for my sister, because I know she's stuck in her head. She's stuck with just in her mind, she's gonna lose her job because she refuses to get vaccinated. And if that's a requirement of her job, because she works for the hospital in IT, but she's willing to lose her job, and she's not willing to get the vaccine. And what I say again, it's like, this is not a perfect world, girl. Like, you know, you got to do what you got to do to survive. But at the same time, it's like, in my mind and in my heart, I've been praying for God to spare her the trauma and the suffering that I've seen others go through with COVID. So in my mind, it's almost like I see this as like God trying to help her and keep her from having to go through this. She sees this as like the worst thing in the world. And so there's two very different perspectives in this. And I just want her to be okay. And so it's just two very different perspectives from this. And it's really hard to see things from such different perspectives that you can't see the positive but potential benefit or positive out of the situation. You can only see it as like a negative and a bad thing and a control, controlling me, controlling my body, etc. Cassidy, and it's like Cassidy says, oh no, Ferny, that makes me cry. You are so sweet and kind. That upsets me so much that this happened to you. And I think you're talking about me getting my ass beat. Growing up in a violent home and growing up with a stepfather that was relentless and that just would beat me for whatever reason, I learned how to be an angry person. I learned and was conditioned into being an angry person and could be a violent person. And as I got older, when I would get upset or I would get angry, I could feel that energy come up. It's like a surge. It surges up, and I would recognize that. And immediately I would recognize it not as me, but as my stepfather. And I would see that energy in me, and I was like, this is what he did to me. He turned me into him because I feel now what he feels. And I made a promise to myself that I was going to end that cycle, or I was going to stop that cycle so it wouldn't repeat itself. And so I made that decision for myself. And so whenever I get to a place, I spent a lot of time trying to practice just being peaceful, just being calm, not allowing myself to get aggravated or upset. But I'm a human being, like that's not practical. And in the world that most of us live in, like, we're gonna be pissed off. Sometimes we're gonna get triggered, especially relationships. I always tell people, if you want to know how much your relationship can endure, if you want to make sure your relationship can survive anything, build a deck with your spouse or your partner, because that will make you both insane, and you'll realize how much you can endure together. But I always tell myself that I was going to break the cycle. And the cycle ends with me. I won't carry this violent cycle into the future. But that part of me still exists. And every now and then, if I get that pissed off or angry, it shows up and it comes up. And I have to figure out in the moment. First of all, I have to catch it. Because when you're in that state, when you're in that angry state, it's hard to catch it when you're only seeing red, but you have to catch it. Like, this is the anger. This is what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing my stepfather. I'm seeing this past experience. So you have to catch it. Once you catch it, you have to talk to yourself and talk yourself out of that being the way to deal with stuff, that being the path to take. And so I have to talk myself out of sometimes getting more angry, getting more upset, because I definitely have had anger issues after all of that. And so in my life, I've worked really hard to not allow myself to get to that angry point. And so sometimes when, like, I'm having an argument with my partner, my partner and I don't argue very often, honestly. Every now and then we have a discussion or we have a dispute over something stupid, but for the most part, we don't really argue. But when we do argue, which tends to happen like once a month or once every couple of months, we'll argue about something. I can feel the energy come up within me, and immediately I want to respond and react the way my stepfather would react with me. And so I have to pull myself back and say, no, stop. And so I've never touched my partner or ever hit my partner, and I never will, because that's the promise. Like, I'm not going to repeat this cycle. Again, I've only been aggressive and physical with people twice in my lifetime. And so for me, it's like, I'm not going to respond that way. I'm not going to treat my partner that way. I'm not going to do to him what was done to me. And so my first desire is to get away from the situation. Like, I need to get away from the situation. I don't want to let this continue to build within me because I don't want to lose control. And I know that you can push yourself. Every person has the ability to lose control. And so I don't want to let myself get to that point. So I just tend to walk away. I tend to either want to stop the conversation, or I completely shut down and I turn off my receptivity to the interaction or to the conversation, and I try to find something else to do. And so I try to go somewhere else or get away from the situation because I don't want that part of me to come up and then for me to lose control of it. So that's how I respond. My response is like, okay, this is not gonna fix anything. Talking is not working. I shut down. If the shutting down doesn't work, then I try to leave the situation, just go walk away. I'm just gonna walk away from the situation. And that tends to be the way that I mean, people would say, well, you're a coward, you're walking away. And I was like, no, I know what exists within me and what potential I have, and I don't want to express that part of myself. So I need to find a way to just deal with it differently. I'm not going to give that part of myself more energy or more power. And that's the way that I choose to deal with it. Now, the next step for me is just to become detached from the topic or detached from the issue itself, because when you have a detachment, you don't care. You're not as invested in whatever it is. And that's what I'm currently working on, is that sense of detachment. Because again, remember, I grew up never being okay with talking to people or expressing myself. And now I'm on the opposite side, where I feel very comfortable expressing myself and vocalizing what I have to say. So I'm getting back into the center where I need to have that happy medium. And in order for me to have the happy medium, I have to learn, which is what my process is, learning how to maintain an involvement with life, with people, and engagement when it serves purpose, but not be overly attached to situations or people or scenarios that really have nothing of value or bring nothing into the scene that is aligned with what I'm here to do. So that's where I'm at right now, and that's what I'm learning to do. So, all right, guys, I love you all. I'm out of time. I gotta go over my walk. I love you all. I will be back on Friday. Okay, y'all take care of yourselves. Bye, everybody.